Time once again for another episode of Talkin Baseball Games. I'm Bruce McClure, and this is a project of the SABR Games and Simulations Committee. Today, we have our friend Andy Palomino with us. Andy's from Montclair, New Jersey, and has a very unique take and use with baseball simulation games that I think everybody's going to enjoy today. Andy, glad to have you in today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bruce. Glad to be here.
So, I'd like to start out with everybody. Let's talk a little bit about the fandom of baseball, so to speak, that you have. How you got started in baseball, how you became a fan.
Well, it goes back to probably let me back up a little bit. I was born in Cuba, so I was introduced to the game in Cuba. And an uncle of mine probably took me to a game when I was, I guess, maybe around 9 or so. So this is probably 1970 or so. And then in 1971, we were actually one of the last families that left Cuba under a sort of a quota system that the US and Cuba had in place at the time. So we were one of the last ones to actually get out in a legal, organized fashion from Cuba. So we get to the US in 1971, and I at that point I had only been to one baseball game, in Cuba. So my dad wasn't that much of a fan, so the fandom piece didn't come from him. It really came more from a couple of friends in my neighborhood that were already diehard baseball fans, and slowly the game started to grow on me. So I would say that probably by 1973, I became a Mets fan. And a lot of it too was based on baseball card collecting. So 1973, 1974 were the first years where I started collecting baseball cards. And when you have the baseball card, you want to sort of associate it with whatever you're seeing on TV. So that the idea of becoming a Mets fan sort of took wind from there. But really the wacky thing that determined whether I was a Mets fan or a Yankee fan was something really silly. So back in '73, the American League umpires had the big outside chest protectors.
Yes.
Which I thought looked really dumb. The National League umpires had the inside chest protectors, yep, which I thought was, okay, that looks a little bit better. And that simple little distinction was what made me move to be a Mets fan instead of a Yankees fan, which led to so many years of frustration, as you know, because the Yankees obviously have been much more of a successful team. So imagine that simple little thing is what made me a Mets fan, starting in around 73, 74. Yeah.
Your entire baseball world, so to speak, started off on a style statement.
That's it. A style statement led me to become a Mets fan instead of a Yankees fan.
Andy Palomino, baseball's style leader.
There you go. Yeah. But a lot of pain came with that as well, obviously, because the Yankees were a much better team than the Mets for the last 40 years or so. Yeah.
Well, I got to say, I'm a bit of a Mets fan. I'm a Mets guy. I'm an Orioles guy. I'm a bit of, I'm still a Red Sox guy. Bill Nolan, if you're watching, yes, I'm still a Red Sox guy. It's okay. I had that interest in the Mets from my dad, because when I was a kid growing up in Western Massachusetts, we had 3 TV stations. One showed the Red Sox, one showed the Mets.
There you go.
So I'm right there with you. I could never figure out when I was a kid why, when the Red Sox played the Yankees, they were playing in Shea Stadium. I'd be like, Dad, why are they playing in the Mets Stadium? And he was trying to explain to me that, well, they're renovating Yankee Stadium and it's going to take a while. And I'm like, well, what's taking so long?
Can we just get this done?
Can we get this done? What's going on? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned Cuba. And Cuba's baseball tradition is incredibly rich. It's incredibly layered. Tell me what you remember about baseball in Cuba, and compare it to can you compare it to your experience with baseball in the United States?
The only memories I have, because again, I came when I was 8 or so, I just remember the rabid fandom of it in Cuba, but I don't remember specifics. But basically, it's just as popular, as it is in the Dominican Republic today. I mean, it's just, and obviously, that the talent is there because we've had plenty of Cuban ball players come over to the United States and be successful. And it's really a shame that the talent pool can't be opened up more than it is, because as it is right now, they have to, the ball players that want to play in the US have to sneak out of the country through Mexico or wherever else to eventually land in the US to be able to play here. So it's a shame that we can't tap into all that talent that's there now, because the fans there are just as rabid as they are in the Dominican Republic. So yeah, maybe someday, we'll see.
I've watched a couple of the games in past World Baseball Classics where Cuba is playing, and fans are off the hook for that.
They really are.
National team. It's so fantastic to watch.
Yeah.
Granted, the whole thing is this visual spectacle of baseball that is almost overwhelming to the senses. You've got chanting and flags, and it beats the daylights out of a August 95-degree, 95% humidity, Detroit and Arizona game.
I would concur.
375 people in the stands. But
absolutely.
I'm going to get an email on that. Somebody from Detroit or Arizona is going to be like,
more than likely, somebody's gonna be hating on you soon. Yes.
What'd you pick on me for? But that visual, especially with the Cuban national team,
exactly,
to me is just incredible. And if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Cuba has won the World Baseball Classic once. Do I recall?
I believe they have. Yeah.
I think it was the last one. I'd have to look that back up. But
yeah.
But at my age, the memory's not what it used to be.
I understand. I'm right there with you. Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. Thank you.
No, I'm right there with you.
So we talk about your Mets fandom. I'm sure that kind of peaked in '86.
Yeah, it did. And really what happened was, well, it kind of went through a couple of phases. So from 74 to 77-ish, I became a diehard fan. Then you grow up a little bit and you find out about girls and other things. So sort of it petered out a little bit between 78 and 83. And then in 1984, Dwight Gooden hits the scene. And that sparks my interest again. So I become more involved in the Mets again, 84, 85, 86, and even 87. But even then, Bruce, and I might be an anomaly in this, but I always thought that being a fan of a team was a little bit of a dysfunctional relationship. So I always wanted to be more of a baseball fan, not a fan of a team. So fast forward to 1989, and I'm introduced to rotisserie baseball, AKA fantasy baseball, which, by the way, I hate that name. I like to call it more statistical baseball. But anyway.
Okay.
So 1989, I'm introduced to fantasy baseball, and I create a couple of leagues, which I am actually still the commissioner of today, 35 years later. And basically what rotisserie fantasy baseball allows you to do is, basically get together with a bunch of friends and either draft or through an auction, create teams of, all the available players in the baseball universe. So the moment I did that, I slowly started to wean myself away from the Mets, and I started to root for the guys that happened to be on my, made up team. So, that didn't happen immediately, but I'd say by 1991, I really no longer had any kind of emotional attachment to the Mets. It was more just the guys on my team. And it really allowed me to become just more of an overall baseball fan, because if you want to play fantasy baseball successfully, you have to know the entire player population. Otherwise, you're not going to have a successful draft or a successful auction. And in our leagues, it is an auction. It's not a draft. We did it right from the start. We did auctions to put the teams together. So that gives you a little bit of perspective. So early Mets fan, then I took a break. Mets fan again in that 84 to 87, 88 period, and then slowly wean myself off the Mets. And today I just root for baseball, not a team in particular.
That's very interesting that you say that, because I talk to a lot of people within the organization and outside of SABR about their fandom and what they love about baseball, or what their favorite team is, or whatever it might be. And moreover, today I'm hearing people say, I just want to go to the ballpark that I'm closest to. I want to see a good game.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy myself and have a good time. Not necessarily invested in my team here or that team there. I get a lot of folks who say that the MLB TV service is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because of course they could sit down at night just about watch anything. And now it's expanded that they can watch minor league baseball as well.
It's fantastic.
And that's just going to be killer for folks like that. And I tend to be one of them. I'll sit down and flip through a bunch of minor league games at night too. So I'm kind of in your ballpark, so to speak. You know, I have an affinity for a couple of teams, but I don't necessarily live and die by those teams. Now, if my dad were here today, he would sit down next to me and look at me and say, you live and die by the Red Sox, or you're no.
Or else.
And I gotta say, Dad, I'm sorry, but as I've matured and grown over the years, I'm like you, Andy, I've grown to understand that it's not, I can't invest myself emotionally and spend that energy knowing that I'm probably not going to see my team win a world championship, no matter what team it is.
You know, Bruce, agreed completely. And I think the first time I had an inkling that something just wasn't completely right in being a traditional fan was probably in 1976 when the Mets traded Tom Seaver to the Reds. So here I am, that's my favorite player, diehard Mets fan at that point. And even as a young kid, I must have been, 11 then or 12? I say to myself, wait a minute, time out. No one asked me if this was cool, if you could do this. You didn't ask my permission to trade Tom Seaver, my favorite player, to another team. So at that point, I realized that the fan has zero power. You know, you can say whatever you want. You're not going to buy the ticket. You're not going to go to the game. But the bottom line is, once you become a fan and you become invested, it's really difficult to detach yourself. And in what other relationship do you have that kind of back and forth? You know, if you tell your wife or a close family member that something is going to happen unilaterally, they're going to look at you like, really? You're not going to ask for my opinion? And in traditional baseball fan, well, not just baseball, any sport, no one ever contacts you, right, and asks your permission to make a move. You just have to accept it. So if that isn't the definition of a dysfunctional relationship, what is?
That's a pretty good point.
It's a one-way relationship, and that's just not a healthy relationship.
That's a pretty darn good point. Many a Mets fan has shared with me where they were when they found out that Tom Seaver was traded.
Yeah.
And it's a seminal moment. It's the watershed.
The franchise.
The franchise. Yeah. For Red Sox fans recently, it's Mookie Betts.
Yes.
And I think for every franchise, there's one. For the Oakland, it could be when Reggie left.
Absolutely, catfish right behind him. Yeah. So it's and again, it's the idea that so much of your emotion is invested in that team, and they just did something that was tragic to you without your permission, without your intake, your input. So
that goes to kind of my next question that I talk about when we talk about the game itself and the games that we play about the game itself. You mentioned, that your enjoyment of the Mets changed greatly, from what I can gather, when they traded Tom Seaver. Now, you obviously were invested in that time, and I'm sure you had a community, so to speak, with you that was also experiencing this. What were the discussions or the thoughts and feelings like among those that you knew that were Mets fans that read the daily news with Tom Seaver gone?
It was really incredulity, because, and again, I'm talking about a bunch of 11, 12-year-olds, because again,
Right.
my dad wasn't a fan. And a couple of adults that I knew were at the time, but it was more our little group of kids, just in complete disbelief that this could have happened. I don't think the others had the same take that I had on it in terms of the, wait a minute, something's wrong with this relationship type of understanding. But certainly it was really a heartbreak, because this is somebody that you've rooted for, that you've invested emotion in, watched their games, and all of a sudden, like that, they're gone. Not only are they gone, but what you got in return was garbage. So at least if you had gotten some fair compensation, maybe the sting would have been a little bit less, but they didn't. I'm trying to remember what they got for him. Pat Zachary, Steve Henderson, and Doug Flynn. Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. So I mean, that just didn't cut it. So, but yeah, there was some pain. I know my friends were all in disbelief when the news. And remember, back then there was no internet.
Right.
You had basically 4 channels of television, and then you had the radio. So the news didn't get out there as quickly as it would have today. But as little bits and pieces came out and we found out about it, it was just it was disheartening.
I think there was one radio station in New York that got the proverbial scoop, if I remember correctly, before it was published in the papers, and that set the whole thing off of the hatred for the ownership. And
yeah, I'm trying to remember the GM back then. Joe McDonald, I think it was.
Yeah, was it Grant was the owner, if I recall correctly?
Yes, S something Grant. Yes.
And
yeah, so those 2 guys were not too popular. Yeah,
and he was portrayed as quite a buffoon in the press.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, for me, it wasn't a trade, but it was a free agent signing, Carlton Fisk.
Yes.
And it all came down to a clerical error. They didn't send his contract on time. It was postmarked a day late, and he took advantage of it. And I was incredulous. I'm like, why couldn't he have just signed it while he was still? And I learned double quick. It's a business.
It sure is.
And this is going to happen over and over again, kid, and you better understand it.
Yeah, and the sooner the fans get used to that idea, the less pain they're going to feel. Yeah,
you're starting to see that trend take over. I mean, exactly what you were talking about just a few minutes ago. Fans rooting for the player.
Yeah.
Instead of the diehard, California Angels fan, I live and die by the Angels. They want to watch Mike Trout. They want to watch Shohei Ohtani.
You want to watch excellence, regardless of whether it's on your, team or not. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I just think overall it's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Ohtani might look good in a uniform. Yeah, Mets uniform next year. Who knows?
Yes, he would. Yes, he would. Considering the owner has apparently a lot of cash to burn. So who knows?
Lord.
Yeah.
God bless him.
That's going to be an interesting bidding war between the Mets. I guess maybe the Mets, the Yankees, and the Dodgers, and who knows? I don't know if the Angels have enough to stay with those others, but we'll see.
Be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah.
Really well. Now, combining with your enjoyment of real life baseball, you started out in tabletop gaming.
Yeah.
And you started out with APA.
Correct.
How'd you get started in that?
So probably, I think it was when I was a freshman going on to becoming a sophomore in high school. I just found an ad in one of the baseball magazines, and it was, the two dominant companies were Stratomatic and APA. And I think maybe the third one might have been a company called Replay.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, the aesthetic of the APA card it just drew me in. Stratomatic is a great game, and I've played Stratomatic as well. But the card the stock of the card is not as stiff, and I just thought the APA card was more artistic, and that is sort of what led me to order the APA game. And it took off from there. And then there were a couple of other schoolmates of mine that I got into it with. I introduced them to the game. And then we started some greatest teams tournaments. So I never actually played like regular seasons or did replays, but I ordered their set of greatest teams, which I think at the time was, I forget exactly, but somewhere between 30 and 40 teams. And we played greatest teams tournaments to determine, who the best greatest team was. And we probably did that God knows how many times. We played those cards to death. And it included the 27 Yankees. It included, 61 Yankees, 54 Giants. I don't remember all the teams off the top of my head. 75 Reds, 1911 A's, 1931 A's. So there were some great, great teams. And we did these tournaments forever, really, for many years, all through high school. And then once I got to college, things kind of died down from there. And every once in a while after that, we would get together and play a few games. But really, the intensity of the cards and dice game was really those 4 years in high school.
Huh, okay. And I'm sure you started out with the basic game.
Started out with the basic game, but I quickly graduated to the master game. I just thought the basic game was, I love the idea of giving the pitchers grades and numerical grades instead of the A, B, and C of the basic game. So I just love the idea of having the numerical grades, which went from 1 to 30, and other aspects of the master game that I just thought were better. The master game did take a little bit longer to play, but I didn't mind that. I would prefer to get the most accurate results possible, even if it takes a little longer to get to the results. Which goes against a lot of what other people like. A lot of people just like a quick flowing game. I don't mind it if it grinds a little bit, as long as I get solid, realistic results.
I once knew a guy who actually started playing APA with the master game.
Wow, right from the start out.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, his name was Ed Zach. He wrote the card handbook.
Yes, I've read a little bit about that. Yeah. Wow.
He started out with he just picked up the master game and started it. I remember talking to him about saying, really? I had trouble wrapping my head around the APA master. I started with APA.
Yeah.
I should say I started with APA and I started with Stratomatic. I kind of started with those hand in hand. And for me, at least, Stratomatic won out.
Yeah.
And I still play it today. I've got a drawer full of cards, and
it's a great game. Stratomatic's a great game too. Yeah.
Matter of fact, interestingly enough, I'm up here in New Hampshire, and Stratomatic was originally sort of conceived up here in New Hampshire when Hal Richmond was on vacation at camp outside of Lake Winnipesaukee.
Wow.
So I always
interesting.
Living up here, I always thought that was kind of an interesting little thing. With the company is so entrenched in Glen Head, but you don't realize it. But a lot of the testing he did was when he was in school as a camper up here.
How about that? I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, he used all his buddies as a guinea pig, a tester.
Excellent.
It's kind of cool. There's a couple of books out there that have been written about it. So
what are friends for if not to use them as guinea pigs? Yeah.
Exactly. They just had their opening day a few weeks ago down in Glen Head, and I guess it was an overwhelming success. First time they've done it open to the public in a couple of years with COVID and all of that. And Fabulous for them. Fabulous.
I subscribe to the APBA newsletter, but I also subscribe to the Strat newsletter just to sort of know what's going on in that universe. And I saw some of that activity. Apparently it was quite a success.
Now, you have obviously kept up with APBA through the transition from Millersville to Mr. Hershen in
Alpharetta.
Georgia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how has that changed the community of gamers, for the better, for the worse, not at all? How's that?
I came in a little late into all that politicking, I guess you would call it, because in between the time that I picked up the APBA computer game and the last time I played the cards, I wasn't as involved in the community. And when I started this little project I started recently, that's when I started to get back into, the newsletters and all the information that the community talks about. It seems like, from what I've gathered, that initially, there was some angst and some concern about where Mr. Hurston was going to take the company. But really, all I've heard recently is just positives, like just the way that he's shepherded the company and the way that he's allayed any concerns about where the company was headed. I think it's been really, everything I've heard has been extremely positive.
I see where he's taken this company and expanded its offerings so much.
Yeah.
With the cards and dice, you could get just about any season you want now.
It's fantastic. It's got, you have access to all the seasons, and then another thing that he's done too is redone some past seasons that were not everybody was carded, and he's gone back and recarded everything, which I think is fantastic. So I think, and again, I've only been exposed to it for the last, say, 2.5 years or so again, but it seems like he's done a fantastic job.
What I find interesting is that I hear repeatedly that now that the company is in his hands, the service and speed at which the client gets their order is overwhelmingly faster than it used to be.
Interesting.
And that's he's it's like a small business again.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's not a subsidiary of whatever company had it.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, he's a one-guy operation.
Close to it, from what I've been able to gather. Yeah, it's him, and I've been able to gather this from the APBA. There's an APBA podcast, and I've gathered all this information where, it's basically apparently him and a couple of all-time employees, I think, that came over from when they were in Lancaster. So it's a very tightly run ship.
And that's just fantastic. It's such a venerable name in tabletop gaming. You want to see it stay out there and stay on people's gaming tables forever. The same with Stratomatic.
Agreed.
There's these two camps that I see. You've got your APBA guys, you've got your Strat guys, and for a little bit, you've got your replay guys, not nearly as many.
Right.
But you get, I only play APBA because APBA is the best.
No.
I only play Stratomatic because Stratomatic is the best. And here I am sitting here with my little tabletop and my little game, and I'm like, I chose Strat. I don't know why. Your game's cool though. I mean, there's a lot of that, and that bump, and I don't see why it should be there. It's like
I agree. No, it shouldn't be that way. It should be more a fraternity of baseball simulation game players, because they're both good games, and they're different games. They're both good. But yeah, it should be a fraternity. It should be a union, not a clashing.
I like it. I like that. Now you've given me the perfect segue into the meat of our discussion this evening. It's a fraternity that brings people together. And you've had a really interesting project with the APBA computer game.
Yes.
And it seems like this project has expanded the scope of your interest in the games. And it seems like you've brought the game to more people.
Correct.
Tell me about that.
Well, it all started, as I mentioned, back in '89, I started the fantasy baseball leagues. And the part that I enjoyed about fantasy baseball more than anything was the auction, the creation of the teams. And when you employ an auction to put together a fantasy baseball team, it's a lot more challenging than just a draft. If you're in a draft, when your turn comes up, you pick your player and you wait till your turn comes up again, and that's the end of that. When you're in an auction, you have to do a couple of things. You have to value the player correctly, because it's basically you're operating with a salary cap, and you have to employ some type of an auction strategy to decide at what point you're going to bring out players that you want to actually purchase, and at what point you want to bring out players that you want somebody else to purchase to bring down the available money in the prize pool, in the auction pool. So that fascination with the auction, at some point, I'd say probably 10 years ago or so, I thought, wow, how cool would it be if I could do an auction, not with fantasy baseball where you're basically bidding on projected stats, but I wonder what would happen if I could bid on actual stats. So if I already knew that player XYZ was going to do this, and we held an auction, how would I value that? And could I do that? So, because that was the passion for me, the auction piece. So in 2020, when we unfortunately got struck with the COVID pandemic, a lot of us were furloughed, and even though a lot of people suffered, there's a lot of folks that got furloughed, and, I think it gave people time to reflect on things that maybe they've always wanted to do and just never had the time to do. So that was sort of like where this whole idea started to percolate, where I thought, I was introduced to the APBA computer game through a podcast I heard while I was walking, taking my daily walk. And I thought, you know what? This seems to be what I could use to implement that idea of actually holding an auction based on simulation baseball players, not fantasy baseball players. So from that point on, I did a little bit of research into creating a website because I wanted to be able to document the results. So I created a website called baseballsimauctions.com. And essentially what we do is two individuals get together, and it could be more than two, but let's just use two as an example. And you take two historical baseball teams and you deconstruct those teams. You make all those players free agents. And the two participants then have 260 sim dollars to basically bid on 26 players per team. And again, the challenging and the fun part of the whole process is, for fantasy baseball, you can buy software that will tell you what you should be bidding on these players. But for baseball sim auctions, there is no such thing. You have to create your own valuation system, which makes it incredibly challenging, but also so much more fun. And then once the teams are created, then at some point in the future, a couple of days after that, once the lineups have been submitted, because the two owners submit lineups, pitching rotations have been submitted, I set up a Zoom meeting where I actually simulate entire seasons to determine who the winner was. Now, one of the things that I did is I didn't want it to be like a traditional World Series, because there's just way too much randomness in baseball. So what I did is that we simulate an entire season, which the APBA game does in a matter of minutes. And every season counts as one game of a World Series. So whoever wins 4 seasons first wins the World Series. And then that way you are guaranteed that whoever wins is the absolute best team, because you're doing entire seasons, not a best 4 out of 7 game series. So that's sort of like the Cliff Notes version of this little project. It's really about taking historical teams. And again, APBA has every season in history. So whatever you want to do, you can do. The most recent auction that I did was a friend and I deconstructed the 41 and 99 Red Sox. So basically, Ted Williams' best year and one of Pedro Martinez's best years. And those were the focal points of that auction, which is tremendously fun. And actually, Pedro Martinez went for $53, which is the all-time record in any of my sim auctions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well worth it. But that's the gist of it. You basically deconstruct historical teams, make everybody free agents, and then through an auction process, which I run on Zoom, we create brand new players to create two brand new teams that you then can run simulations with to determine who the best team was.
Now, there's obviously raw statistics that are generated as you sim these games on Zoom. Do you look at these stats when they're done and kind of do a dive, whether it be deep or not, into them to take a look to see as if there's any sort of anomaly or interesting thing that might happen during the seasons that differed or mirrored real life?
Absolutely. Well, you know that the numbers are the lifeblood of baseball. So you got to get into the numbers for sure. So normally what happens is after I simulate an entire season, and it's interesting because the APBA computer game has different modules. So you have to kind of get out of one module and get into the stats module. But after I simulate a season, I do pull up all the stats and show the two participants, myself and whoever else is on, exactly what the stats came out to be for that season. But I go a little bit deeper than that too. Once all the seasons are done, I compile all those statistics and average out all the seasons. And then I send whoever the other participants were, I send them a rather detailed Excel file of all the hitting stats for all the seasons that we sim, combined averages. So you get an entire packet of stats after we're all done. And it's interesting for this particular, the most recent auction, the 41 Red Sox and the 99 Red Sox. So Ted Williams ended up averaging 441 for the season. Really? Real life, it was 406. But remember, the numbers can be skewed depending on how your opponent's team turns out to be. Mm-hmm. So my opponent's team's pitching was a little bit on the weak side. So Williams basically feasted on his pitching. And as a result, his sim batting average ended up being even higher than the real life batting average. 441 he batted.
I just had your website up on the screen. I grabbed it while we were chatting and decided to share it a little bit.
I appreciate that.
It's beautiful and it's colorful and it gives the user a lot of great information on how these things work. As I scroll down through home plate, you get a lot of great information on, it's kind of like the boilerplate pitch, the elevator pitch is the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
On how this works. And then I can click, how does this work? And here's all the details.
It definitely, I put a lot of work into it. And then just recently I thought, you know what, maybe folks need to actually see how this works. So I created a few YouTube videos too, so.
Oh, that's a great idea. See, I just pulled this up real quick. So you even have a YouTube channel which details kind of how this works and recaps seasons.
What I did is I just started doing that because, again, going back to the conversation you and I had earlier before we started recording, you know, I still have a full-time job, so there's only so much I can do with this. But absolutely, what I thought was, all right, let me just start to put some stuff out there on YouTube so people can actually really see how this works. So I actually put the 1941-1999 Red Sox auction on YouTube, and I also put the World Series on YouTube, and then I also put just an instructional video so that people would actually see how, you know, what the process is like.
That's just fabulous stuff, because that is such a unique way. I'm just scrolling through part of your website for folks to see now. It's such a unique way of using the games.
And Bruce, one of the reasons that I created it too was if you and I know you do some replays, but I look at what I've put together sort of as a baseball appetizer. And what I mean by that is if you're going to join a league, that's a big time commitment. If you're going to do a season replay, that's a multi-month time commitment. If you want to do a sim auction, we can do the auction. 2 people can do it in an hour and a half. And then another half an hour, a couple of days later to actually simulate all the seasons. And boom, you know who the winner is and you're ready to do another one.
That's just fabulous. And you're so right, because I'm in 74 AL. I'm in 62 NL. And, I love my tabletop gaming time. I have a gaming table in our family room. I can spread them out. My wife's doing her knitting, watching a television show, whatever it might be. She'll be like, hey, who's playing, who's winning, things like that. But I've been in these 2 leagues since COVID lockdown. I'm in May, June of both seasons. And that's a couple of years.
Exactly.
We both have pesky day jobs, and
exactly.
That's unfortunately where the constraint really takes hold.
It really is. And that's why I thought, okay, well, apart from the fascination I had with the auction process, I just wanted to come up with something that you could do quickly without having to commit to it for months. And this actually is working out perfectly for that type of an agenda that I had.
Now, how big is your community of players?
Well, at this point, I probably have about 20, 25 people that have done it.
Oh, wow.
And I'd love to get more, because I think once you try it, you can get hooked. It's just so much fun. And again, it doesn't require a huge time commitment.
So saying I want more players, I'll bite. Tell the fans that are watching today how they can get involved in your project.
Absolutely. Well, they can get a hold of me at baseballsimauctions@yahoo.com, or they can go onto the website as well and also subscribe to my newsletter, which will alert them when I'm planning, a new project. So those are probably the 2 quickest ways that they can get a hold of me. So again, the email would be baseballsimauctions@yahoo.com, or just go to the website, baseballsimauctions.com, and subscribe to my newsletter. And I will inform you when a project is upcoming. Or frankly, you can get a hold of me anytime and say, hey, I'd love to deconstruct these 2 teams. Or me and my buddy and you would love to deconstruct these teams. And again, the menu is endless, because we have every team in baseball history available. Actually, what I love to do is challenge you, Bruce. You should do one with me. That way you can be an ambassador. You should give it some thought, even though I know Strat is your game primarily.
So now, I participate in the auction. We're on Zoom.
Yep.
Everything is run. I don't need to necessarily have the game on my PC to do
No,
it.
That's the beauty. You don't need to have the game. Although I would recommend that you do have the game, because, you could run your own simulations once the teams are created. But basically, let's just assume you and I decided to do an auction. So I set up a Zoom meeting. I send you the Excel file with all the players that are available to be bid on. All the stats are there visible. It's full transparency. And you can see what these guys did. You don't have to do the research. On the Excel spreadsheet, you know what they did. And as the auction is taking place, remember, I'm a participant and the auctioneer.
Mm-hmm.
So we're keeping track of it. I actually have a little timer on the screen. You get 9 seconds to bid on every player. Every time you bid, the timer resets again to 9 seconds. And then when a player is purchased, he goes on your team on the spreadsheet. You can see it on the screen. And then we're up to the next player up for bid. So the whole auction is tracked.
I don't think I can think that fast.
9 seconds to bid. Yes. But again, once you bid, the clock resets, and then eventually at some point, one of us stops bidding and you're awarded the player. But keep in mind, it's a salary cap, so you have $260 to buy 26 players. That's the challenge.
Oh, wow.
That's the
You
challenge.
really
So
got to
it's not,
do some planning here.
you do. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's challenging, but it is incredibly exciting and fun.
Now, the community of gamers that you have that participate in these auctions, are these personal friends or these people that have just kind of found your website and said, hey, that looks cool, I want to try it? Have you recruited? How have you come up with this community?
Sort of a combo, but the majority are just folks that I've known. And then,
okay.
and then they know somebody and then they say, hey, why don't you try this with Andy? So it's the majority have been, I'd say out of the 25 or so, 20 are just people that I've known. And then from people that I've known, there's been, a connection to somebody else. That's why I'd love for the gaming community to say, hey, I'm going to give this a shot because it's so much fun and so challenging. So
it's a really unique take on what to do with sports simulation games, whether they be tabletop or computer. You hear constantly, I set up a draft league based on 1954, or I'm replaying 68, or I'm doing, and you don't get to see some of the interesting projects that are out there that really aren't talked about much because, well, replays are cool. And then you can send them into the newsletter and have it published. I mean, I do it with our community where I'm showing statistics as I go from both of my replays.
Absolutely. And replays are fantastic. I have nothing against them. It's just that they take a lot of time.
No.
Same as, being involved in a league. So this is, again, for anybody who doesn't have a huge amount of time, I think they'd really enjoy a sim auction. And
so everyone who watches this now knows that the gauntlet has been laid down for me.
Exactly.
Oh boy. So at some point, I'm probably going to have to get a hold of you. We're going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do a lot of heavy reading first.
Well, absolutely, but then just think of a favorite team from your past, and that'll be the team you deconstruct, and I'll pick one, and we'll deconstruct those two teams, and maybe I'll bring a third person into it to make it even more fun, and we'll give it a shot.
Now I've got a lot of material behind me because I've got baseball guides that go back to the 40s.
So you're all set.
So I can.
Between that and baseballreference.com, you have all you need.
Right?
Yes.
Right? I've got the background. I've got the raw stats at Baseball Reference.
That's it.
Who knows? Who knows?
I guarantee you'll have fun. And anybody else out there that sees this video, I think they'll enjoy it.
You know what? I think they will. I think it's such a fresh and interesting take on the use of sports sim games to provide the end user with such interesting content right on their computer screen. And they're not going to see that anywhere else. And no. I'm going to urge the gaming community, get in touch with Andy today and discuss that with him. Because I think what you're going to find after listening to Andy today and then getting involved with such a project like this, that it's going to refresh your idea of a couple of things. It's going to refresh your idea of what sports sim games mean to people. And it's going to refresh your idea of how to build community through sports. Because
absolutely.
You go into a league, go into a draft league or even a replay league, and competition, it can be at a very high level. We move into something like this. It's a 7-game series simply for the fun of the deconstruction and the results that come out.
Exactly.
And that's been my contention for an awfully long time, is that competition does not have to be, for lack of better, blood sport.
No,
doesn't have to be boom, boom, boom.
No, I think you want to enjoy the process, and if the result turns out to be to your advantage, then great, that should be gravy. But But you really need to enjoy the process first. And then if the result comes your way, great. That's just an extra.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know what? This has been fascinating and a really great time. Andy Palomino, remind everybody how they can get in touch with you and how they can get involved in your project.
Absolutely. So anybody that's interested, they can get a hold of me at baseballsimauctions@yahoo.com, or they can take a look at my website, which is baseballsimauctions.com. And there you can actually sign up to my newsletter, which will keep you abreast of any upcoming projects.
This has been a fantastic conversation and a really fresh take on sports sim games. And I really appreciate you doing this with me this evening, Andy. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it. Glad to be on. It was great.
On behalf of the SABR Games and Simulations Committee, I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Andy for participating today. Look for some more great interviews coming very, very soon on our website. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.